Hi everyone, welcome back to the Improve Work podcast. Today is a special episode because I have a guest. My guest is Kendall Wallace, the owner and the lead facilitator of Executive Offsites. Kendall helps companies to improve employee satisfaction and engagement through team building events. She helps teams to improve communication, to build a higher trust between team members, and to deepen communication between them. She works mostly with tech companies, for example, with Meta, for which she facilitated communication workshops and offsite team building events. Welcome, Kendall.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniela. I'm so happy to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Kendall, how did you start your business? What made you start a business focused on team building events?
So, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about how I started actually. So, I was working at Meta. I worked there for about 4 years back when we were called Facebook and then Meta eventually bit. And you know, I had also worked at other companies before that, but in tech, remote in a company that actually has now become one of the leading digital parking apps in the world. Um, and in both of those experiences, yeah, I moved around from team to team and really got to see how different teams operate. And uh, I will say, actually, I ended up starting my business. Um, this might catch some of your listeners off guard, but I ended up starting it because I was fired actually, for not being a good teammate. And when something like that happens, you really take a hard look at yourself on like, what can I be responsible for? And certainly what was very interesting to look at was how I was bringing like I was working as a UX researcher and was working with other peers that were telling me what to do and like weren't I didn't feel heard or seen or valued, which really was a trigger point for me, especially when it was another very strong-willed female on the team. And it was really interesting because to see that repeated pattern of me not getting along with the strong-willed females on the team, and then I realized what that was actually me just playing out unhealed mom stuff in the workplace, and like it blew my mind when I put those pieces together. That's why I just loathe being told what to do by this other female on the team. And what was super interesting, obviously that's the part for me to be responsible for 100%. But what was super interesting too is to look at the missed opportunities after missed opportunities of when we did team building stuff, we did team building events, things like that, that actually didn't, that really didn't hit the mark. And they didn't improve how we interacted. Like instead, we'd have these team days and you'd play a game, but you wouldn't relate it to how people actually work together. And so people would leave. I left those team building days before I started doing this. You know, I left those team building days really having the same kind of communication challenges. So with my teammates, like it's those investments in actual like, okay, the stuff that you go home and you like complain to your spouses and friends about, like that's the stuff that we actually need to make some dent in. So actually, the funny thing is even after I was fired from Facebook or Meta at the time, then they brought me another team member though, who I had a great connection with, brought me in to lead a communication course. So I
Wow.
actually did that 3 weeks out later, which is really funny. And it was really because I was growing in my like in my desire too, I would have a hand in doing some of our offsites and that type of thing. It was it was my day-to-day job as a researcher that wasn't where I wanted to go. So after I left Facebook, I did that that offsite about 3 weeks later digitally. And then ever since, I've really looked for opportunities to work with tech companies where I am actually, helping to create the team camaraderie that a lot of companies need, especially in this remote work world. Like your podcast is all about improving work. Well, part of that is creating meaningful work relationships and, being able to bring people together when companies do want to invest on that time. And actually, like, I pride myself on like doing the stuff, and it's like usually communication or really really fun activities that then you integrate that those fun experiences with how it relates to work. Like these are simple things, but like that I certainly didn't experience in my world at tech, and so now I bring those elements to companies I work with. And a lot of it takes place outdoors too. It's like let's be out of a conference room, out of the stuck energy, and really create some joy while having these productive and honest conversations.
Yes, this is a fascinating story, and thank you for your vulnerability. And I want to ask you, how did you change yourself? What helped you to have a broader picture of your situation and to change how you act in a team?
The short answer is with a very good therapist. I mean, I think often we like want to not look with ourselves, but I think honestly the big aha moment for me came when a therapist posed the question, where else in your life have you had somebody make you feel unheard, not valued, not seen, where it was their way or the highway? And like no matter what you said, it didn't matter. Like you were just trying to, like, it didn't matter. And I sat there listening to that question. I was like, holy shit. I don't know if we can curse on the show, but I did anyway. I was like, holy shit. This I'm just playing out unhealed mom stuff, in the workplace. And so I think what's interesting is, so often people also run away from like the honesty. But when you get smacked in the face, you gotta face it. And like so often people, yeah, just well, the funny thing about it though is like people will run, they'll switch teams, whatever. But like, it's like you got to notice your patterns if you want to see something different. And the other thing I'll say too that shifted, I had another experience, I think around, yeah, I think it was where somebody provided me bold feedback in a very loving way, and that's the way feedback should be delivered. In the workplace, we send it so anonymized, off into cyberspace. And that person, uh, gave me like a heartfelt looking me in the eye and was like, listen, you're not being a good teammate right now. And like, yeah, it's, but in a loving way, wanting to see me rise. You know what I mean? And like
Yes.
when you get like and what's so fascinating is a retreat I ran last year. We did that exercise where we went around the table. There were 9 of us. We had we every person was giving one piece of feedback. um positive and one piece of feedback negative for each person. Okay. And the leaders went first. So myself and the other retreat leader went first. And so that we could demonstrate too how you give feedback and how you give, like, don't be scared. Like, let's be real with one another in a very loving way, like wanting to see the person rise, coming from a place of care with your intention. And it was one of the most powerful exercises for everyone at that table. Like, we still talk about it. And think about just how different, basically our work relationships would be. And if like you have to look someone in the eye, not through a screen, but in real life, being able to, it's vulnerability on both sides. It's
Yeah,
vulnerability for the one giving the feedback, it's vulnerability for the one receiving. And it's like,
right.
it's with a heartfelt, like, intention of seeing the other person up level. I mean, my desire would be to see that, and like going through all corporations, to be able to have that level of like candor and care. And it's really on the topic too of what we're talking about today, like, ways that companies dehumanize and demoralize, you know, their employees and make people mercenaries and expendable and switch teams and not give a shit, and it's I think a lot of that happens when, even in the case of feedback, when it just goes off into the ether and there it is, it's done. So on that note, like where I just mentioned, like how, ways in which I think, particularly around feedback, is a way that, like when you send it off into cyberspace and then it all of a sudden becomes part of people's, reviews, and it's anonymized, that it's, I think that really plays into the dehumanization factor of employees, and really can be demoralizing when you're not kind of having that personal relationship there. So I was just wondering, what ways do you think that you've seen, Daniela, be like, what ways do you think companies demoralize or dehumanize their employees?
Yes, from my experience, companies give feedback, especially when they do performance evaluation. And this is a formal context in which they give feedback. And they focused on results, and they don't focus on what lead to those results. So they say what was good and what was wrong. But when an employee have poor results, they don't necessarily try to find out why that employee had poor results. So from my experience, there could be many explanations. So an employee may not be engaged because, for example, he considered that the task that he was given is not his responsibility. A person received tasks that were not in his job description. In fact, there were they were not related to his job. And he was evaluated based on those tasks. So the evaluation was not on the right criteria. So decisions
Jeez.
were made on that evaluation, but the evaluation was not fair to him because it was not his job to do those tasks. This could be a reason, or maybe cases when the employee received bad instructions, so
Right.
he couldn't do his job well because he was told to do things in a certain way, and
Yeah, I was wondering, so in what other ways do you think companies dehumanize their employees, though, aside from feedback? Like, what other ways in your experience? Because I know you're, in HR consulting, so I'd love to hear your perspective on ways you see, like, companies, demoralize or dehumanize their employees?
One way is when they hire overqualified employees and don't give them the opportunity to use their full range of skills and competencies. And this can lead to strange situations when a person is led by another person who is less qualified than him or her, and he can receive task or instructions that are he considered that are not good, that are not. He may have better suggestions, better ideas than his boss. And also, when you don't utilize all your employee skills and competencies, they can observe the mistakes of the other employees who do the task that they know to do, and they may have ideas, they may have suggestions, but they don't have the authority, they don't have the opportunity to voice these ideas or to say what they observe.
Yeah.
And I think that this is in a company disadvantage not to use their employees' skills and competencies as they could do.
I see. Yeah. And so what do you think, what have you seen as really good like practices that people have done to remedy that situation?
So in the first place, if you hire an overqualified employee, you should think at the opportunities for this person to use those skills, if there are skills that that person is interested in, because they may have skills that they don't want to practice anymore. So you have to investigate this and see what that person is interested in, and create opportunities for him to practice those skills. And in a company, even if you have already an employee working on a job and making certain tasks, if you have another employee who is interested in those tasks, you can consider that person as a backup and give him the opportunity to practice those skills and competencies and maintain them and develop them, because they don't want just to forget about those skills. Maybe if they don't utilize them, they may be lost.
Totally.
So, for example, I didn't use my knowledge in personal administration for several years. And then when I had to use them at another job, I had to learn again the laws and all the procedures.
Right. Totally. Yeah. The laws. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting, like on offsites that I've organized, like to get to make sure that people don't lose, whatever their strengths are or whatever their trainings are. Like, it's honestly what I've a lot of times what I'll facilitate is like small group breakouts, just where people in cross-functional teams are just being able to understand one another. Like one of the prompts I use is like, what's your biggest challenge? And it's just an interesting experience when you have like, engineers and researchers and designers and like these different, categories of role coming together and actually talking about what they're challenged by at work and like, really like commiserating in a way, but in a way that really creates empathy, for one another. Because like I've found, I don't know about you, but I've found that like, you really just teams that work, high performing teams, I mean they have empathy. One of the biggest components is team trust. That is one of the, five dysfunctions of a team is trust. And like how you get there is you listen to one another. You actually have conversations to actually understand what's going on in people's worlds, not just like how many people how many kids they have and where do they vacation, but like, you know, why are they motivated to be on this team? And like, what
Yes.
skill sets do they feel like that are being valued? Which ones aren't? Like how can they create an opportunity to, you know, be able to have those skill sets that aren't being nurtured like shine? And like that type of discussion, like not just, a lot of times that I feel like that only happens with your manager, but like why not have it with teammates over a when you're doing an offsite, team building anyway? Because but the ironic thing is that, you know, maybe because that's out of the box, like certain companies and organizations are like, no, we'll just go to dinner and do drinks, and which is cool, better than nothing. But like if left to their own devices without a skilled facilitator or somebody prompting like this level of discussion, people are just going to go back to their like comfort zones, of like how many children do you have? Where do you vacation? Like that type of bullshit instead of like how can um how can I help support you get to where you want to be in your career? I mean, that's some
Yes.
real stuff.
Yes, we can find out different things about our personal lives, but if we don't discuss directly the work issues, those issues will not be resolved by
Yeah.
knowing more stuff about the person. So we have to address the issues directly and have the courage to say what is not working and be open to find solutions
Yeah, for sure. And be open to
for
being
those.
real with one another. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where connection happens, is like is honestly in being real.
Mm-hmm. And I think that one key component is that we have to see the relationships between team members as collaborative. So we have to discourage competition between team members, but because competition will not help the team to connect and to help each other.
Yeah. And that actually gets reflected, on mistakes that teams make sometimes is in their offsite days, right? They'll play games, okay? But then they inadvertently choose games that maybe are fun, but where there are teams where there are winners and losers. So I actually, and so inadvertently, some people will just have these, they don't want to be competitive with one another, and yet they're being competitive with one another, because they've chosen a game that is team. So, like, what's interesting too, I'll speak to where it can be used more effectively is like I led an offsite in Colorado this past year. I lead offsites all over the world, by the way. I've led in Europe, um, you know, where I live in Hawaii, and then in Colorado, primarily. But what's interesting is I led an offsite for a team of about 70 engineers, and it was their whole product org. So we had different product teams, and I actually did select a game that would be competitive because I wanted them to inadvertently understand that they were actually competing against each other, even though the objective of the game was for them to all win. And about midway through the game, they had this enlightened moment of like, oh, can we help each other? Like all these mini teams. Wait, can we help each other? But we're product teams, so they're used to competing for resources, etc. And I was like, yeah, you can. And it provided this like very rich debrief at the end too. And that's the other aspect too that's like super important when you're like creating an offsite experience is like to have the integration period. Like, what are we learning? What are we taking away? You know, how does this relate? How does what we just experienced, this inadvertent like competition, how does that relate to how we work together? Well, how it relates to how we work together is because we inadvertently compete against each other all the time, even though we're all after the same goal. Um, so it's just really fascinating, and like I think what's really cool is you have to integrate to like the debrief conversation at the end really can bring that home. And oftentimes that's one of the biggest mistakes that companies will make is not having, you know, a facilitator or that discussion at the end.
They don't look at themselves in the workplace situations when they have conflict, for example.
Yeah.
If they will stay to analyze those situations and see what behaviors lead to certain results, maybe they will change those behaviors and replace them with something that will lead to different results.
Yeah. And it's almost, yeah, exactly right. And it's almost like um my philosophy on offsites is that it's really almost a time for you to, yes, connect with your teammates, but also be held up a mirror on what's working and what's not working and what we can solve as a team to make our work lives better. Because guess what? We spend so much of our lives at work. Why not make it better? Why not improve
Right.
our work? Hello, you know? Like it seems so silly. It seems it literally is silly to me that people will go home and complain about their jobs. And I get it because it's such a big part of their lives. But it's like, why do that when we can do the other? When we can make our, you know, our off-site time like time to clear up any group dynamics that play that may not be great, and just create some self-awareness around it, honestly. And it's quite simple. It's not confrontational. People are scared of confrontation. I get
Yes.
it, but it's really not. It's just like empathy building of where people are at, learning about you know, one of the best ways to also make it non-confrontational is to really like look at tests, you know, do a test beforehand, see how the team like fared with different conflict profiles, different personality tests. There's different things that we can analyze to kind of look at like the strengths of the group, right? And how it's differently oriented.
Yes. And you don't resolve your problems complaining at home. Maybe you'll create problems at home also. So you have to address the issues where the issue is at the workplace with the people that are involved in those situations.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
From your experience, how can team members have better connections, better work relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really three things, in my opinion. The first is really to have productive and honest conversations with all pertinent parties about what's not working so that everyone feels heard, valued, and understood. And like what was super interesting at times is like in road mapping, for example, you know, some like this is in tech speak, but I'll speak in tech, you know, is like some product managers would involve the whole team. Others would have a small selected party. And I think it's hard to create alignment with the team and motivation if you're left out of the conversation. And there is, you know, there's almost a little bit of like a little kid being left out, you know, from a conversation mommy and daddy had. That, you know, i.e. the team leads on like what happened that I think could be really demotivating for a lot of
Yes.
individuals. Like I experienced it on teams where that was the case, and like there's just there was very little team camaraderie. There was very little team like involvement. Like that when the PM did that to me and left research out of the equation, which unfortunately sometimes, that happens in very like engineering driven, you know, teams, is that sometimes design will be like left out of key meetings. And it's just, I mean, that's a typical occurrence. That wasn't just mine. I've heard that many times. And it's like, leaving people out, can be really tricky. So I think like that's one of the key factors, is bringing everybody together or at least the invitation. And then, just having those productive and honest conversations with all parties. Like the second really big thing that you need for better work relationships is to have a memorable shared experience. Actually have fun with the people that you work with. Like, not bullshit fun. By the way, I didn't never ask you if I could curse in your thing. I'm hoping it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. All right, good. No, but not like, escape room, like actually enjoyable fun, expansive, nurturing to the soul, the stuff that's gonna, produce the serotonin and oxytocin in the brain. I mean, that, for me, like one of the most magical ways to do that, is like have a sunrise hike. Have a sunrise hike. Like we did that in Colorado. We were staying at a location. It's like, and people opted in for who could go, but like that was memorable. Another group, yes, they came out to Hawaii, and not everybody can do that, but nonetheless, they were having a surf lesson with some of the best surf instructors in the world at sunset time. Sun's going down. The watercolor is just super orangey. A sea turtle pops up next to, people that are out there in the water. I mean, that is something that they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. And oh, by the way, they were with some teammates. That, like, that's a legitimately cool experience. And oh, by the way, they were with their teammates, makes it better. It makes it a memorable shared experience for that set of colleagues. It makes it something to look forward to or something to reflect on that's cool that you experience with work colleagues, And you don't have to do it on the expensive. You can do the simple, but it's about putting a little bit of heart and a little bit of thought into creating this like heart-centered experience that's really freaking cool, that people will go home and then brag to their spouses and friends about.
Right.
Right. And then really the third aspect of creating the better work relationships is like, once you have that, the psychological safety, you really, you co-create, aligned deliverables, and you really address hurdles as a team. So like the other thing is that like after teams will go through, an experience like an offsite, they'll be cruising, they'll be like, all right, game on. And then they get to that first challenge afterwards, that first bit of conflict, and then it's back to old patterning. And so how I help lead teams through that is through having a coaching container afterwards, where we can help to integrate the experience, because it's really important how that team, addresses the hurdles going forward, because they need to have a new way of operating, right? And so that's what you do when you create an offsite and you create that in-person experience. You create a new way of operating, and then it's a matter of like, okay, the next time they get a stumble, making sure that they don't operate the same way, that it's like they're navigating the conflict more effectively because they're ensuring that everyone feels valued, heard, and it's a positive experience to navigate through that conflict, rather than going home and complaining about it. I'll just sum it up. So it's like, so really to have meaningful and better work relationships, it's really about having those productive and honest conversations with all pertinent parties. You have a memorable shared experience that fosters connection that's truly enjoyable and awe-inspiring. And then you really navigate the first stumble in a new way, a more effective way, a way that's more positive. It's almost like a new operating system for conflict.
Mm-hmm. And for how long do you keep an eye on those teams to see if they apply what they learn in your events?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the contract calls for, but like honestly, my ideal is to work with a team over a 1 to 2 year period and
Oh,
basically do an offsite, once a half, so once every 6 months, and bridge the team with like a call in between, each month in between, to bridge those months. So a call to keep, so that I can be able to coach and help them through some of the challenges that may come up. Um, so yeah, it's really about, yeah, bridging that time in between the in person with, opportunities for integration, and then continuing to build on those elements too. Because how often have you, experienced offsites or things like that that really haven't built off one another? You know, like the ideal is to be able to, develop connection, and then you get a little deeper the next one, and then you get a little deeper. And deeper doesn't necessarily mean, okay, we got to go all deep and meaningful with our conversation. It's more about like, um, be the levels of trust, they get
mm-hmm.
deeper. That's the point, because that's how high performing teams are. High performing teams, trust is there, and so it's really about building that in a gradual manner.
Yes, the potential is there, but we have to work to get that potential out. So we have to
Yeah,
work to make these connections better. All people, I think that have good intentions, but we have to help them to channel these intentions together and make those connections.
yeah, yeah. Have you ever had a really what's your like, have you ever had an offsite that you really enjoyed? Like, what's your most positive, or what's your most memorable experience with a like team building? Um,
Um, yes, I have team buildings, but I have to admit that they didn't follow up for a long period of time as you offer in your team buildings. So they just follow up for, I think, 1 or 2 months, and the results couldn't be monitored. And even if they teach us something, they couldn't observe if we apply what they teach us. So I think that this long-term approach, as you do with your clients, is more effective and will lead to better results. Because this is the
yeah,
problem with team buildings. They do a good job, most of these companies, but they don't do a follow-up longer enough to ensure that the results are obtained by the teams. And
yeah,
we just participate at this team building event. We felt great and we have fun, but then we go back in our offices and the old patterns repeat. So
yeah.
that's why I think that it's great to have these long-term collaborations.
Yeah. And what do you think is the amount of time that you wish you could have had follow up after a team building?
I think that maybe from for 6 months at least. And another problem is that the knowledge that that I experience in these team buildings are general, so they are not focused on a particular situation. So it's harder to apply them. So they are not so effective.
Can you say more about that? What do you mean? Like, what can you give me an example?
So I learned about communication, team communication, but there were general knowledge, and it depends on every person how they understand those knowledge and how they apply those knowledge. So
like it would have been better. It would have been better if there was an example of like,
yeah,
remember the
yes,
guy on the team that you mentioned earlier in the call who was given tasks that he was evaluated on something different. Like if the exercise or education was about something directly real relative to like what he could relate to, that'd be better, right?
yes. If he had the power and the strength to communicate his what why he's not engaging in those tasks, and that he considered that it's not his job to do those activities, maybe he will had more understanding from the management. Maybe they will realize that they crossed the boundaries with those tasks, and this employee is right. He shouldn't receive those tasks.
Yeah. So what would you see being a good offsite experience to help address that issue?
I think also management could be more open to can create opportunities for employees to speak up, to get feedback um, about their relationships with coworkers, with their manager, feedback about their task. If they have these opportunities, their worries, their complaints, their dissatisfaction will come up, and will be known by the management, and they would be able to take decisions taking in consideration the employee's perspective and perceptions of their jobs. So but if they don't know how an employee thinks about certain things, they can't take into consideration that employee perspective.
Yeah.
So in the
That
first place, they have to create opportunities. Maybe they could have one-on-one discussions with each employee individually to ask for this kind of feedback.
Yeah.
And I think that it will be beneficial for every company to do this at least once a year, to see how that employee feels in that job and in that company. As a manager, you can't know all the issues the employees confront with, so you have to ask them.
Yeah, it's
You
true.
have
You have to.
you have
Yeah,
to create
that's
time for this.
what I'm hearing you say really is that, you know, the offsite time is the time to allow people to be heard and seen and valued
Yes.
and like be honest, and share that among each other so that they can actually connect, so they can actually build trust, so that 2 weeks down the road, they're actually something has improved in the relationship, you know?
Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I hope we'll discuss again maybe in the future and find out how things evolved in your company.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Daniela. This has been a pleasure. And, if anybody would like to reach out to me, my email is Kendall at executiveoffsites.com. I think you're going to put in the show notes.
Yes.
And then my Instagram is corporate offsites as well as executive offsites. But yeah, I have both of those handles.